Morning, everyone. So we're going to talk about the after Ocho. So I had a big video discussing why I made my Ocho list, and now that the tournament's over, we can kind of go back and look at the list and see what I would change, maybe what I wouldn't. I don't want to spend too much time on the games itself, you know, without having a lot of screenshots of it and, talking about plays and stuff. It is kind of difficult to you guys don't really get much out of it. I think maybe the lessons learned from it will be more important. But we will look at the list I played against real quickly. So this is my list for those who maybe haven't seen it or anything. So I use an Exalted Herald General. I have a Chariot guy with a 1-up save, Binding Scroll, and Hero's Heart on Chariot. 18 Greed Warriors with Relentless. 10 Lust. 3 Feldrax, the Chosen Chariot of Lust. Pride Knights, Slayers with Skinning Lash, Flayers with Skinning Lash, and 2 Feldrick Elders. So these are the lists I played against. I played against a UD army. I considered this one green. I beat it 19-1. I played against KOE. I consider this yellow. I beat it 13-7. I played this Ogre army. It was yellow. It was 9-11. That was a tight game. I mean, these two games are actually pretty tight. I could have lost bigger or won bigger on both of them. This VC army I considered orange. Essentially, I think it's kind of a tough matchup with 2 Shrieking Horrors, and Trolls is a very good player. I think he wasn't risky, but he gave me an opportunity with my Herald to charge a Terrorgeist on like a 8 Swift Stride or a 9 Swift Stride, and I took it, and it worked out for me, and it kind of opened up the game. I still consider it a pretty hard matchup. KOE I considered yellow and got a 20. And then Warriors I considered yellow and got a 19. So as you can see, a lot of yellows. So if you look at my grid, so these are the grids taken from the 6-round tournament. And these are what I rated everything. So if you look just generally, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 green. I think it's 8 orange, and the rest are yellows. The plus minus being what I consider maybe more skewy yellows. And if you look for patterns, pretty much I always put VS as yellow or orange. And I put a lot of VC as orange if they had double Terrorgeist. I don't believe the first one did. And I know this one only had 1, so I wasn't as scared. And actually I felt more confident because of my win against Trolls that I felt like I could handle this list. And I was a little conservative probably. As I went towards the end, I started doing less greens. And what it kind of means is, so to me, a green, and I think some of the greens early on might be unfair. To me, a green, you have to be like, this matchup is a pretty big slam dunk. Like I should win it a heavy portion of the time. And I think that it just doesn't happen as much with, and maybe it's about learning the matchups more. So I think on both sides, like the reason I have a lot of yellows is I'm like, oh, I can play against this, right? That's just I kind of like put my hands up and be like, okay, I can handle it potentially, as opposed to, I don't have a good sense of what's an obviously horrible matchup and what is a great matchup. A lot of times I'm just like, yeah, I can beat it. And sure, I get, but my army also gets big wins in yellow. So the yellow says to me, these armies are kind of evenly matched. It's a game, and then it's a skill game, and then you kind of go from there, and you hope to win the skill game. And when my army starts winning, it can win really hard. It's hard to you know what I mean? Like if you come out to play, I have the speed and the tools to just take it the rest of the way, which actually I think is a very strong thing to have at ECC, or to have in a player, or whatever, to have in an army, I guess. Because think of it this way: if you have an army that's super good in a lot of matchups and super not good in a lot of matchups, like very polarized, then one, you have to pair for it, and two, if the enemy is good enough to minimize the loss, maybe it's not as bad. And maybe you don't win as big because they know it's not good, and so they kind of try to bunker up and hide and lose 7 or 6, right? I think when you have yellows, you put yourself in a position of both people think they can win potentially. There's good and bad parts of the matchup, and then it comes down to who knows it better and who plays it better most of the time, and then that can lead to big victories. So I actually prefer an army that can, and like I said, there's probably more greens out here than I put down. There's maybe a couple more yellows than I think, but I don't think it's as apparent enough to, I don't know. I still learn what I think is truly good. Like I said, I'm more conservative and more pessimistic about like, oh, he has some tools here, or he can do this, or this could go wrong. So I don't put as many greens. And then to be honest, a lot of these oranges, I said they were orange because I'm doing the pairing and I want to know that it's not the best matchup. But I was very willing to get stuck in some of these matchups and didn't think that I would like necessarily lose 5. Like I would lose big. It was more of this is going to be tough. And I think that's one great part about the list is I haven't stretched it to the ends of testing to where I know every single matchup in and out, but I think it can handle a lot of things. I think Warriors generally are pretty tough because they have good leadership. They're mainly a lot of fearless. They don't really crumble like that. They have a lot of pieces that work by themselves. They're very good at scenarios, and I don't know. They're just a tough nut to crack. They don't have extra BSB points, which is randomly 200 points. You don't have to worry about giving up, and usually they can take things down while getting killed. So it's not like very rarely do you lose a game where like you didn't kill anything and you lost your entire army. Usually you're taking stuff down, and if you focus on the scenario and you get it, you can only lose 6 is the biggest you can lose if you win the scenario. So I know someone asked me would I take this to a singles event, and yes, I would. Clearly there will be matchups that you're going to have trouble with, but I don't know if that's enough to be like I don't want to play this in singles. Yes, a double Terrorgeist VC list is pretty fucking tough to play against. You just deal with it. I mean, it's tough for most Warriors armies. There's not a lot of Warriors armies out there that are like, I really want to play that. Maybe somebody with slightly better magic and not as many big single models, but still, I mean, you're going to run into problems of like, are you bad against alchemy? Are you bad against this? And are you bad against div? You just got to kind of deal with them as they come and weigh your options on how to deal with it. I would like to explore this and really get a sense of what is good and bad matchups, because I feel like as far as like ETC is concerned or any type of team event, knowing when a matchup is good or bad and how to play them is super important. And misrepresenting what a matchup is on a grid is so hard for the pairer. And if you like get green matchups and don't produce, it could be devastating because there's a good likelihood that you're giving up a green, or you're getting a green and giving up an orange. And if your orange loses, like it probably should, and your green gets loses as well, then you're just sunk, right? You just given all your advantage away. So this is my grid. There's not too much to say. It just shows that there's a yellow, a lot of games I think I can play. We already looked at this, so back to my list. So how did my list perform and how do I feel about it? So I was very happy with it. Obviously, I came second in individual points. So I came second in individual points behind Scrub. So obviously it performed well when it needed to. I was the person who did the pairings. I'd say I was a mix of, I tried not to give myself bad matchups, but because I didn't have a ton of greens, I didn't necessarily go out of my way to get amazing matchups. I played yellows and I don't, how do I say this in the nicest way? I didn't play the team's best player, except for Trolls is probably their best player. So I'd say, I'd say of all the teams I played, I probably wasn't playing their number 1 or 2 guy, except for Trolls. And that's not a knock on them. They weren't bad players, but I just know that on the team within some of these guys have more ETC guys. Like the Swiss, the Canadians, the English, and these all had ETC guys or guys who have been to ETC, and I did not play those guys. Not that, like again, they weren't bad, but they weren't like the top guy on the team. So that helped my score. I'd say a bit as well. And not that I couldn't, like I said, not that I couldn't play versus them. I just ended up not getting paired versus them. I do think, as far as ETC goes, that's like the next level thing is, can you pay yourself into a yellow, play against some of the best people on the other team, and come out on top? Because that is what you really need to do to win an ETC, right? If you have a good player, and that's why if you have a good player and they just get fed the last place person on the other team, and your teammates just lose around you, it doesn't do anything. You're gonna have a great individual score, but your team's gonna look like shit because you're not helping them, right? And this happens in other team events too, other games I've played, where it's just like if you can put your best player against their best player and win that, it's so big because not only are you winning, but you're taking their best player and he's losing. I think a lot of top teams do a really good job of that, where you see like Thomas from Germany will play a lot of other really good players from other teams. Sometimes he gets fed worse players, but, go out there and beat the best players. Don't, I only take these individual scores so highly, right? Because, like, you can look and Thomas is really good, and it's definitely no small feat to score like 80 some points. I'm not trying to take away from anyone up here, but I mean, there's some people from teams that they were on bad teams. They were just on bad teams, and they got to play bad people on bad teams, and they kept winning, right? Because in a singles event, you would have played better people eventually, but you might just go through this whole event playing guys who don't win any games. So I wouldn't read too much into this specifically in any team event, because who they pair for, how they pair, there's a lot of variables to kind of contemplate than just like, oh, Warriors are the best because they have 4 guys in the top 20. I mean, here's a bunch of Vermin Swarm right here. There's a lot of things you can go through in the data, but it's such a weird sample because of teams that you can only go so far. Back to my list, as I said, I really liked how it performed. It felt good. Let's talk about things that maybe didn't feel as good. Let's see. The Herald felt great. That dude killed it for me. Really liked him this event. I would say I ended up taking Veilwalker more than I thought. I think Veilwalker, to me, if Hellfire is not that good, I guess there's times where I take Veilwalker, and the Grave Calls is really great, and the Hellfire is kind of mediocre, and I feel like it just ruins the magic phase, because you're going to throw all your dice at a Grave Calls, and they're going to stop it probably, and then you're like, your backup plan is the Hellfire on 4 dice, which is way less damage. Listen, you're facing a Scourge, and it doesn't have armor or something, even if it has armor, yes, Veilwalker is great, because you're going to bomb 2 spells at him all the time, potentially. But there's just some armies where it's not worth taking it. I did take it a good bit, though. I ended up pairing it a lot more with Fly, because, so I'll tell you, one thing I learned that I didn't take a lot this event, despite the armies I played against, was Strength 6 and Divine. In fact, I took it, the 2 games I took it, I scored the lowest. And the reason is, I actually think that it can be kind of a bait for some armies. If you can't use the spell well, like my army has a lot of Strength 6 and Strength 5, and I have Evo Magic for stuff, right? I don't really need my Herald to be Strength 6 a lot of the time. I'm not saying it's bad, but I think I used to take it too much. I think that Fly pairs a lot better with Veilwalker because you can get into better positions for casting. Fly in general is just very strong. Swift Stride, the ability to fly, obviously, and the built-in breath weapon and spell of Breath of Corruption is really strong. Whereas if the enemy isn't really have ward saves, do you really need to be divine? That no, obviously. And if they're only like strength, you know what I mean? Like mathematically, having strength 6 versus strength 5 is like maybe a wound difference in combat. Maybe a wound. But my spells, I'm trying to think how to put this. But my spells are like reroll to wound and stuff. And like whispers, which kind of helps increase the fighting power of the Herald. I mean, the Herald is going to hit on 2s and wound on like either 3s, 4s, or 5s, right? Does it really matter? He only has 6 attacks. Does it really matter if that attack is strength 6 or strength 5? When you're getting all these other things. Like, the thing is, it's a trade-off. It's not, strength 6 is better than strength 5, guys. That's no surprise. But is it just better to be Fly, Swift Stride, right? Fly, Swift Stride, and a built-in breath weapon. I mean, that breath weapon itself can almost make up for the strength 6 for how many times the guy's going to fight. And the fact that you can fly gets you into better combats easier. And then, things like reroll to wound and stuff lose a little bit of value when you're already strength 6. AP can matter. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I used it a lot less and I was happy with it. He was great. I think you have to use... And when you take... And him paired, like my magic phase actually felt so good. I don't regret not taking alchemy. I think alchemy has a lot of nice spells with armor and Glory of Gold. Fuck Glory of Gold. I mean, it's a good spell, but when it's one of your 2 buffs, it's just, I don't know. Whispers of the Veil just has so much more potential. Getting Evo spell, reroll to wound is so nice on so many of these units because it works on stomps, it works on attacks, it works on spike shields, it works, it just breath weapons. It just works on so much compared to Glory of Gold, which, it has a reroll aspect built into it with the attribute, but it doesn't work on half the things this army has. It doesn't work on impact hits. It doesn't work on stomps. It doesn't work on spike shields. Sometimes you don't want to be flaming on your guy. And then you have the potential to get the lethals, which is really nice for some of these units. Whispers is great. -1 leadership is always appreciated, and the toughness can be huge, especially because you have many small units. So comboing together, right? If you hit something that's toughness 6 and you're hitting it with 4 or 5 units, then it makes a lot more sense to just drop the toughness of it because everybody in the combat benefits from it instead of buffing just one particular thing. Like I said, armor is great, but I don't know. Defensive buffing is whatever, because a lot of times if you're hitting with multiple things, they'll just attack something else, or you're just doing so much damage that you don't want to get hit, period. So I've been really happy with the Evo guy in this list. And so I'll credit Smith family for pushing me to go Evo, and I really liked it. But when your Herald has like Breath Weapon, Hellfire, even Little Hellfire, and something either Rot Within or even a big spell at that point, or a Pentagram, and then you have like you just have a bunch of little spells, but they're all like super nice. They're all 2 or 3 diceable, and the fact you got to get a lot of value out of your Guiding Light too, because I feel like there are many games where I'm just casting a spell with my Herald to get the Guiding Light, because Guiding Light in it of itself is an amazing spell. Like there are just times where you're like, please just, I want my guy to have minimized checks, especially when you're like Feldrax or your Herald, because you're going to take March checks, you're going to take break checks, potentially stubborn checks, maybe a panic check, or a steadfast check. It's just being minimized just increases the odds so much when you don't have a BSB for some of these units. And if you can get 2 spells off with the Herald, like sometimes you just cast a Pentagram, and the enemy's got to sit there and be like, well, I don't care about the D6 Strength 4. What I care about is, that freaking guy getting Guiding Light, but you have so many spells it doesn't matter. So it's a nice perk of having these little to cast spells, because you can Breath Weapon yourself, which is a big impact spell. There's turns where you're like, I'm Breath Weaponing myself, I'm Pentagramming, and I can heal. A Hellfire, which can do damage. Evo spells, all these like little spells I can cast on 2 or 3 dice. It just makes for a nice a lot of options, I'd say. So I would keep him. I don't regret not having like a second Herald or anything because I think most of the time the two spells on this Chariot guy are going to be better than whatever two spells you get on the Herald because they have so much overlap with the Herald with the themselves. I guess the idea being is if two of your guys, if something is so good on your Herald like Fly or Stomps or something, there's a good chance you want it on both of them, and then it kind of really limits your magic selection. And so like for that points, like for the second Herald, you can get a really tanky guy with two good spells and a Binding Scroll and 4 strength 5 attacks, and you can get a Chosen Chariot, which has is really good. It's the same points. I think when I think of it like that, when I think of the breakdown of like, oh, that second Herald could just be two Chariot things, it just seems like a no-brainer not to take it. Now there are some uses for it. I'm not saying it's bad, but just for me, I think this works better. Greed Warriors, they were solid. I felt like I played them kind of poorly. Sometimes they're just a unit that like has to be dealt with. I threw them away at least 2 games. The 2 games I didn't do as well in, I kind of threw them away like an idiot. Like the Ogre game, I just fucked up my redirect and got him killed. But in one game, they always had potential, I think. I think I need to play them a little better. But, they're a solid scoring unit. They're hard to shift. They're scary with the great weapons. I always think sometimes of going back to spike shields and just taking a couple more bodies. But, there's times where people just won't charge them because they have potential great weapons or halberds because it's just too risky, like big monsters and stuff, right? Spike shields, a Feldrake Elder can go in and be like, whatever, you're strength 4, I'm going to eventually kill you. But if you have great weapons and you're like, well, 4s and 4s, you only have 6 wounds, and I get like 12 attacks with potential buffs from the other 2, you just kind of start to be scared. The Lust guy is great against scoring, ability to flee, ability to walk through stupid terrain, so they knew me like kind of not sat in runes, but they went towards the runes. They kind of had a unit that could fill that gap. Also really nice they can be stubborn in woods and in lakes. Lust is just really nice. I did miss a musician, so we'll talk about that too, a potential change to the list. Feldrax, nothing special. They didn't do anything amazing. They didn't do anything bad. They're a great scoring unit. They're a scoring unit for 365 that has 12 strength, toughness 5 wounds. It's really it. They're not expensive enough to be annoying. And in an army with all these other things, people don't really focus on them. And because there's not 6 of them, you're not worried about them dying. Like this whole list just have a bunch of things that you're like, if it dies, it dies. Lust Chariot, amazing. Do not regret taking Lust one bit. Not taking DTs for terrain, being able to flee. Oh, being able to flee is the greatest thing because you can take so much more risky charges. And just if you fail, you're like, I'm going to flee, or you make them waste a turn. And the fact that you can rally on 3d6 and move back again, you basically just rally and threaten them again on your turn. So what did they do? Or you can move out of the way. Warriors, these were probably my least favorite thing in the list. Not having Musician felt really bad. There was times I really wanted to turn around and run away. They were scoring, so they were fine. It's just they kind of like don't do anything. Like they can hold stuff up. They're cheap, sure. 6 tough, 1+ save wounds. Nobody really focused on them. They took a couple long charges. They held some things. That'll probably be something I change. Flares, I actually like the flares a lot. I'll be honest, and people have asked me about the Skinning Lash. I don't think it's needed at all. Nothing really cool happened with them. Sure, there's the potential. If you have 20 points or 40 points, sure, throw it in. I would put a Binding Scroll in over it than this if I had the points somewhere. If I drop them here, there's not a ton I can get, is I guess what I'm saying. You'll see in the new list that I'm going to try, they're still in there because I don't know what else to put in for them. There's not really a lot you can do, right, with how this list is built. You can't really get, you know what I mean? Is it worth, the option is cute. The 20 points is whatever. Shield is always good, but flares in general are really good. I think they're just so much more maneuverable than dogs. Dogs, when you deploy them, you're pretty much saying this is basically where my chaff is. With flares, if you don't need them in a spot, they can reposition and be held for. They can be held onto longer and be impactful for much longer. And there's times where turn one you walk up and you put them 5 wide in a single line in front of somebody, and you put your whole army behind it. So they have both options. So I could see 1 unit of flares and 1 unit of dogs, and just But I think 5 flares with just even naked, if you don't have the points, provides a lot of use. And there is something to be said where could you get 3 units in, because you only need, if you dropped all the shields and stuff, 60, you still need 80, 75, 85 points, but there's always that potential. But I think 2 is enough. I think 2 chaff in this kind of list. Third would never help, but sometimes you're kind of not using them too much. Elders were great. No comments there. So what would I change? My main focus was these knights right here, and I thought about what I could get from them. So I need a scoring unit, and their main role in this army was to be kind of a sticky unit because they have pride. Sure, they can charge and have 11 strength 6 attacks, but like that wasn't their goal, because unless they can kill something with those attacks, then they're strength 4 afterwards. And I have so much strength 6 in the army that it's not like the great weapon guys are that much better. They're also very spiky away from just being garbage, because right, if you take like 1 magic missile, or you roll a couple 1s for dangerous terrains or something, they have potential to just be kind of lackluster. I mean, they're scoring, and they're 335 points, so I'm not going to talk that much shit about them. But so one change I want to make. So this is my new recruit, and this list is there. So the changes I made to this list is I dropped 1 warrior, and I added musician and standard to the lust unit. It means I'm a little bit more over core, but I got some points for making another change. And the reason here is 17 versus 18 should be whatever. But musician and standard in this unit makes it a much more mobile unit with, as far as being able to reform onto objectives, but also 10 warriors with standard musician champion. Like it's way more formidable than I give credit for. Like there's a lot of units that cannot beat this, and the standard bearer basically says, I'm 1 more leadership for trying to hold things up. It's hard to break through this unit. And there's been times where just having the res for 20 points would be good. It's probably more useful than this 1 warrior up here. So I'm still close to min core, but I think this doesn't really change the effectiveness of the greed unit. I think 16 to 17 is where you're trying to get into. Maybe it's too small of a unit, but it's not the main unit in the army. But this unit, I think, with the musician and champion, just it adds enough to it. There's times where I really wanted a champion or a musician for reforms, and it just makes it a tough cookie to crack on the flank. I think the standard for 20 points, I don't respect standards sometimes, but on a unit like this, it essentially makes it one more leadership to hold, right? Which is pretty nice. And then the other change I made, which got me some of the points, is I changed the knights for 4 great weapon forsworn with musicians, so with damnation too. So why this unit? 1, it has a musician, which is really nice. It moves 12. The knights move 14, so that far. Now 6 versus 8 Swift Stride is a big difference, but I wanted a unit that, like the knights were supposed to be a unit, they ended up being on the flank a lot, but I wanted a unit that could kind of sit in the middle and just be kind of obnoxious, because if you run, it's like a chaff that isn't a chaff, right? It still has a block, 8 strength, 6 attack, weapon skill 5. That can hurt a monster. Now, it's only 3 up save with toughness 4, so most monsters can kind of do some damage to them, but you're going to hurt them back, right? And it's not that expensive of a unit. So you can grind a little more. And if you can't do the 12 wounds to them, they're going to turn into spawns. Now, people will talk about, yes, you have to be careful that somebody charges you, does 9 wounds, you turn into a spawn, and then they get a free reform in their turn, or your turn. Sure, be careful. But you can also set it up so that if they stick, you charge them with your elders and your chariots and your feldrax and your warriors and stuff and your herald. So it's not just a roadblock, it's a roadblock that you can set up counters for and they can't get through it like at all because you're just too strong, right? So there's definitely some uses there. And the this unit was put in to be like a scoring unit that could like walk near a secure target and fight off a lot of things. This can fight off most things that the knights can. And in fact, like I said, it's very scary for monsters because when you turn to a spawn, you kill some monsters. You you can hold units for like ever potentially if you turn to spawns. You know, if you flank a unit. The spike shield ones are just don't fit points wise. I guess there is potential there if we just want to click. If we put in spike shields instead of great weapons, it goes up in points, and I guess you could drop the skinning lashes and put your core back to where it was. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like. It feels like it starts to get to be too many points, and maybe you can go 3. I don't know, but then what do you get if you do this, right? Is 3. I guess that's the question, right? Is 3 with spike shields better than 4 with great weapons? That would be the question to like test out. And then if you went this, you have what 38 extra points. You could drop skinning lashes from both. You have 80. What do you buy for 80 points? You buy another dog unit or something? I don't know. What do you do with? I just don't know what you start to get when you start to do stuff like this because these Force Warren are so expensive. They're like what 90 points a model. It just starts to be too expensive. I think the 4 with great weapon because this also like is kind of scary for, and I don't know what to do with 40 points, so I'm going to put in skinning lashes. Nope, not musicians. The 4 with great weapon just it's kind of annoying. Like it's just you can still flank like a unit and like put out 8 strength 6. It's not nothing. It's only 332 points and you're 12 toughness 4 wounds with a 3-up save. That's basically unbreakable. If you break, you become spawns. So like, it's so much less risky to like flank something, right? If they don't have the attacks, you can't die. That's pretty much the best part, right? If they don't have the attacks to kill you, you're sticking there, and maybe you'll become spawns, and fuck, maybe the spawns will die in there. Yeah, just plan for it. But this is a unit that you can just walk in front of somebody and be like, all right, come at me. It's like a roadblock. It's kind of like it's a mix between the chaff and this. It's kind of what the Warriors. I wanted the Knights to do. I just don't like Knights. They're fine. They were fine, but it's something I would try differently. I did have. I mean, you can start to mess with this. It starts to get like I like this list a lot, and I think this is the list I would play. I would consider. I mean, you could drop the Chosen Chariot, drop a Flare unit, drop this to 3, put a dog unit in here. Like, I think I made a list. Like you could do something like this. It's not fully fleshed out, but where you basically get it's basically the same list, but you get a Portent Lord. Your warriors become non-greed because the Lord's going to start in them. You add a chaff here and take it from here. And pretty much all you did here was downgrade a Flare unit and turn your Chosen Chariot into a Portent Lord, which actually probably this list might have a lot of potential because the Chosen Chariot's great and it zones and it flees and it has a lot of attacks, but if somebody can't kill your Chosen Lord, he just runs out of the unit and like can kill units by himself. The same that a Chosen Chariot does. He's harder to kill than a Chosen Chariot. He's slower, but he can start in a unit that can March 15, so he can run out. He's faster in his own way. Like, this list is probably pretty good as it is. You'd lose one of the more dynamic chaff pieces, so that's something to test. But I think like I get hampered because I'm like, sometimes I get hampered because Lords and units, you kind of lose the number of units on the board. But like it turns this unit into a pretty strong unit. I put Aether Icon just to get min core. It didn't have to be there. Like, I actually don't know what happened. How many points is this? Let's just see real quick if I do this. Yeah, it would be over points. So anyway, point being is this unit becomes very strong with the Chaos Lord. Like it's just the greed ones were good, but this is a unit that's very difficult to break and becomes a strong center with a lot of strong pieces around it. So And I think instead of speed banner, I think Relentless gives you the option to kind of play fast with the rest of your army and just kind of go up and say, all right, I'm right next to everything. So this is an interesting one, or just any type of Chaos Lord. You can do Chariot ones. I think I kind of like being in the unit and then popping out of it with Relentless Banner. I think it just has a lot of potential, and probably dynamically changes matchups maybe more than the Chariot does. That's be something to test in the future. Because strong characters are just, I mean, they are what they are. They're just super strong characters, and if they don't die, they hold their points very well in a unit. And a lot of armies, like I said, they can't deal with them. There's just nothing they can do, right? There's just, yes, if he gets sniped or he gets a cannon, sure, he can die. But I mean, there's a lot of other things in this list just as dead as the Chosen Chariot is, right? So that's kind of the argument people have sometimes is like, or it's hard for me because all I'm doing here is dropping a flare unit into the dogs because these two units, this is the same unit I had before. This is just not greed, but if you have the Lord, you don't really need greed. It changes the dynamic of it a little bit, but I still think this is a strong unit on its own, not being greed. Yes, the dogs are worse, but a lot of times, to be honest, the first chaff you're doing with the flares is something that 8 dogs could do. It's nice to have this unit in your back pocket. Like, the more I look at this list, I actually really like this list. This is Spike Shield version instead of the other one, because it's less points, which is fine. Like, you only need 3 of them. And this is also a pseudo chaff in scoring. So, I mean, this list is probably pretty good too, to be honest with you. It's not 100% fleshed out. Someone asked me how I played the list. It has I didn't really join the Chariot with the Chosen Chariot very much. You lose the ability to rally on 3d6 and to move because you need most of your models to have it. He was just another piece that just charged. I mean, this list isn't... You play it like an MSU army, right? You have multiple charges, you have multiple units that can create overrun paths, create fleet erection path, create threats in different ways. Nothing in this list besides the chaff is bad. I don't take any scoring that can't help and hurt itself. It beats a lot of other scoring in armies. There's no vulnerable character as far as like it's a 500-point mage that sits in the unit by himself and needs to be protected. Everything can fight. Everything can... I mean, obviously, we all know chaff is chaff, but if you take away that, which you need chaff anyway, everything does what it does. There's nothing here that you're like, oh shit, I hope it, I have to keep it away from everything. Everything can die, but everything can do damage while it dies. And you might be a little bit safer with the Chariot because it's a little more vulnerable to cannons because it's only 4 wounds and doesn't have a ward and all this stuff. But at the same time, you have a Herald and 2 Feldrakes and a Chosen Chariot. Like, there's things to deal with. They have to deal with before they deal with that sorcerer. And sometimes I hide him and come out like later in the game to kind of be like a backline helper of charges. But yeah, I mean, I think the key to deploying it is having a good idea of where your scoring is going to go, because your 2 warrior units do not move very fast. I mean, laterally. So you have to have a good sense of where they're going to be. But like, don't be afraid to reposition the Feldrakes. Don't be afraid, like Elders. Don't be afraid to be kind of slow and steady. Kind of like deploy it, see what your opponent does, and then react. Sometimes I have an Elder on the flank, and my first move is to go 16 inches to the left, right? I don't have UB up right now. I don't have UB up. But, you can start on one side and go all the way to the other side. So there's a lot of value there. All right. Sorry, I had to take a break for lunch. I forgot where I was. How to play the list. I talked about how you have to put the warriors and plan on how you're going to win a scenario. That's probably the biggest thing, because you're scoring, like I said, Feldraks are fast, warrior knights are fast, but they don't have musician. The other two units aren't that fast. So plan for the scenario. That's number one. But two, be very open to like how the game's going to play out after they deploy or after the turns develop. I think there's some patience to the list. Um, there's a lot of not skill isn't the right word. There's a lot of you pay in monsters for the ability to move laterally very fast, and some units cannot handle that, and you can easily put a unit out of the game. Um, if let's say you deploy an elder and they put across from it some move 4 or 5 infantry unit that heads up you can't beat for whatever reason. Well, if you just move 16 inches to the left, like there's not much they can do. You don't have to kill what's in front of you. You don't have to kill everything in one turn. Um, Sometimes the game is one in turn 3, 3, 5, 6 when you're surrounding the enemy and they're out of position and they can't do anything about it. Um, so patience and honestly, it's an MSU army with a lot of strong pieces that can do a lot of different things. It's a lot of almost everything can flee a charge, but at the same time, it's not really susceptible to leadership checks. So much, obviously, there's the elders and stuff with the steadfast checks and redirect checks, but you have a little bit of mitigation with the herald. It's weird because like there is some synergies in that things work together, but it's not so much like it's not like a sea guard and the stand and shoot thing, right? Not every little unit has to be perfectly in range, but you gotta watch out for like there's a lot of things you can minimize, and you have to take risks with redirect and panic checks potentially on elders and keeping them out of range and where you put your attributes and stuff like that. So yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, and the game kind of develops turn 1, 2, and 3 movement phase, and you can make up for bad deployment somewhat as long as your scorer's in a good place, but you can't make up for like a bad game plan and bad. You know what I mean? You keep your options open and find your windows. Don't be too hasty. Let's look at. So I told you what I would consider changing. As far as my future with Warriors, I'm going to continue playing them. Obviously, ETC is not till next year. We're going to repick the USA team, so I don't know. I think I have a good shot to make it again, especially if I stick with Warriors because I performed well on them. But I'm also the type that I like to spam one army. I like to get really good with an army and know it really well and know all the matchups. I don't need to bounce around a lot. I'll play. If I was going to play other armies, it would be to help the team practice for other armies and to get me a little bit of insight of how to play them. Like I played High Elves the other day just to give Travis a different matchup, but it kind of gives you a little bit of insight of maybe where the struggles are, where the weak points of an army are, or maybe what the enemy's going to do. So I think there is some use. If anything, I'll probably play pre-written armies that I know are good, and just to give my teammates something to practice against, even though I won't be able to play it to the high standard that maybe somebody else will, but it's still good. I can still play things well enough, especially since I watch a lot of people play on UB. I have a good sense of what they do, but for the most part, I'll be playing Warriors, and I'll be testing new things. You're always... I think one thing I want to do to get better is really focus on matchups, and I want to be able to go and say, I think this DL is this, and it's not just a high-level thing, because a lot of this is like, oh, it looks bad, because is it really bad, though? I don't know. Maybe it's playable, and not only that, but if I ever get caught in a worse matchup, I need to have a good game plan. That's the biggest thing, I think. I think a lot of people look on paper and they pick a couple reasons why a matchup is green or orange or red or yellow, and then they get to the game, and because they don't know what the game plan is, or they know what the enemy game plan is, they end up getting bamboozled by, oh shit, this guy's playing it this way. I didn't expect it, and it's actually not that good of a matchup. Because some people, the biggest bait is you play somebody who's bad and they run at you and they die, and then you all of a sudden think this matchup's a green, and then you play somebody who plays it defensively and you're like, oh shit, I cannot get a lot of points off of this guy. Maybe it's not a green, something like that. So I really want to get more focused on, I know a lot of the army rules now, the enemy rules. I know a lot of, obviously, warrior rules. I think the next one is to say, all right, I very clearly I said I was bad against VS, and I think they all had demons in them. Is it actually that bad? And what if I get caught in the matchup? What do I do to minimize it and maybe win it and give myself the best option? Because yeah, that's what I want to do. Get better at playing at specific matchups. Really know it. See if I can hone the list any. I'll probably play with versions of this, and I'll probably have other versions where I try different things. I really like the Herald, so it's like one of the tough things is ETC is not for a year. New books will come out, point changes will come out, things will change. So at what point if I really like this list and it's working and I want to keep playing it, at what point do I have to tell myself, well, you got to try something different just because? Like, sometimes lists just come to an end. You play it a lot and you realize it's not your thing, but, how long do you play a list until, let's just say, hypothetically, this was my ETC list for 2021, assuming nothing changes with them. If I knew that today, would I just play the next 50 games with this list and learn every little thing I could? Or do I keep looking for something that could be better? Because at some point, you're just going to get a spiral of changes that, it helps one matchup, hurts the other matchups, all this stuff. And I guess getting specific data might help that. So the last thing we'll do is look at 2 Warriors lists that performed well. We're going to do Shino's list, and I think we're going to do this list. I'm not going to pick the other 2. They weren't on the best teams, so I don't actually think I guess the XX wasn't. Let's look at Shino's list. I know his is different than mine. He'll want me to talk about it. So he had this unit like I wanted. He did well with this. Let's see if there's anything after the fact. I know I talked about it beforehand. Oh, so he went the Envy version. Interesting. So he paid a good bit of points for it. He has banner speed. Okay, so this is like the warrior unit, but it's a delivery system. And he has 3 scoring here and scoring here. So he has a bunch of kind of cheap and shitty scoring. Whereas if you look at my scoring, even if I don't make this change, if this is equal, and then I have Warriors, Feldrax, Warriors, I put more points into it, but it's stronger scoring. He takes a Chariot guy. I mean, his is more what you see a lot, right? You see a Portent Lord, or you see a War Dice Lord, you see a strong Wizard Master with Alchemy. It's slower than mine. It has some toughness. I think battle shrines are really nice. They're a little slow for my taste, though I really like them and provide really good magic. I think the Chariot guy, he liked him, but it's always going to be risky with the Chariot because it's 5-up save with a 1-up, 5-up, 4 wounds. 1 cannon can kill it. Boom, 600 points. It just seems it's so scary, even though he has good zoning. I do like the War DS ones better. I don't know what he's going to change in this list. Like I said, much stronger magic phase than mine. It has 6 spells versus my 5, but it has a Wizard Master and Ledger of Souls, so he has a ton of dice, 3 channels. But he pays points for it. I mean, this guy does not fight. He's on foot. He has to, it's that same idea I was saying before. Look at this list. Take out the chaff, which I guess is this. I guess you can count the Barbarian Horsemen kind of as chaff. They're kind of cheap, and maybe this. These units don't fight by themselves that well. This guy does not fight by himself that well. Shrines are pretty good by themselves. It's just a different type of build. I don't know if I'll go back to the shrine or not. It's kind of hard to fit it in some of my builds because I really like the Chariot zoning. It's a different build. Still a solid build. I mean, if you want to look at the Globo Gym list that did pretty well. it is what it is, right? Um, I think with Warriors, and if you look at Tanka is another great example, and we talked about how much we didn't like his list because he's a better player than his list is. You know what I mean? Like this is a solid list, but it's not a list you give to one of your best players. I think the same with I think the Global Gym did it well. I think Taggart's fairly new. He's learning fast. He's not a bad player. But this list isn't like it's not super dynamic, right? There's not all these crazy plays to made. It's 2 units of warriors with battle shrines in them, 2 more Feldrak units, and a knight unit with a strong lord. It's like 3 units, right? 3 units and a chaff piece and solid magic. And a chariot. Like it's kind of blocky in its own right. I guess it has some speed. It's weird. I don't know. It has speed without being like it doesn't have the single models to like make plays with and stuff. It's just hard to break. And a lot of games I watch, like he played a solid game, but it's just sometimes your opponent just bounces off you, and you're like, well, I won because they couldn't kill my shit. But at the same time, this is a great style for somebody who isn't as experienced as other players. Like, and that's the opposite with, you know, this other list, Tanka's list, is that he's way better than this list is. He can only do so much. It's probably even worse version than the other guys as far as like blocking is. It's 2 units of Feldrax and a unit of warriors with characters. You don't have that many decisions to make, man. Like, and he knows this. It's not new. I talked to him about it. Give this to somebody who's not that good. Like, give it to somebody who's just solid. You don't, you give this to Furion or Scrub or whatever, and they're not doing any better with it. They're not going to do anything that's special compared to like an average player. So sometimes you got to build a list for the player in its own right, which is interesting. What else listed go? This guy was up there until he lost the last game to Skaven, which is probably a pretty bad matchup for him. His isn't that different than mine, I guess. He took the Ancestor, so I guess it is different. What did he basically... We talked about this list before. I actually didn't know who this guy was when I first reviewed it. And now I know who he is. I knew of him before, but his nickname on Tourney Keeper is different than Vertigo, so... I know he's on the forums. So he takes this like I do. He takes a Herald like I do. His magic's a little better, but he has guys on foot. What's the biggest difference? His scoring is different. Like, he's again doing that light arm scoring. He basically takes this big ass guy instead of like the super score, the more fighty scoring that I take, and he has like a lot more. Like, this is all kind of cheap shit. But he did well with it. It's the same style. Your basic thing is, do you have some scoring? You have some redirectors. You have the main pieces, which is Exalted plus Elders. And he gives, instead of having a Feldrake unit and a Knight unit, he takes an Ancestor with Supernatural Dexterity. So it's just another big piece to run up. His scoring is a little weaker as far as, like, this is easily to kill, and this is not, none of these are that strong in themselves, and they have to house the character. But he has good chaff, 3 chaff units even. But yeah, it's a solid list. I wouldn't complain about it. His magic's a little... He has one more channel on his spell than I do, and he has second binding scroll, not bad at all. And this guy's actually pretty tanky, like this. Yeah. That's the style, right? We're not seeing many... We're not seeing many Hellmauls, and I guess I'll end with this commentary that if you listen to any of my earlier videos, I was all about the Hellmaul. And I still think it is a great piece. But I think the style of Warhammer it plays is not the style that I like as much. I think it's tactical. I think it's very hard to use. I think there's some really cool things you can do with Hellmauls. And I think there's even room to maybe try to play a Hellmaul with no portals. Maybe like in my list instead of the Chariot. Just take a Maul with no portals and see if you can make it work. And maybe do it for like late game scoring and late game plays. Because it's still a monster. And at 280 points, if it dies, it's the same points as like a Chariot, right? It's a little cheaper. Obviously, it doesn't have the same threat ranges as it does. But it actually provides a very nice flanking threat because it has a big rank and breaks steadfast. Or has a rank, actually. Um, that's an option, but I think like the whole two Helmall list, two portal list, or single portal list, I think they're still very strong. I know the Russian Kirill did very well with his; he got 80 points. But I think that's kind of like the not upper limit, but that's the kind of list it is. It's kind of like very tough to crack. A lot of good things here and there. You know, good magic. This is down here. You know, good magic, solid scoring because that's 20 warriors, 7 force war, 9 chosen. But if somebody wants to kind of hide versus it, there is potentially more difficult to push the envelope, and it's just a different style list. Maybe a little more boring, but still very strong. So I, unless something drastically happens with points and stuff like that, I'll probably still play the more aggressive style because it's just how I like to play the game, um, and have enjoyed it a lot more. I still think lists like this are very good, and you need to be good with portals to do it. Though I do think, so I think right now there's like kind of a couple different shifts in meta, right? They used to be all about Hellmalls, but now they're good for team events because they're more solid, and maybe not as good for singles sometimes because maybe you don't have the high win potential. But again, it's very hard to lose with them. I think you have this Feldrake one where you take like two big units of Feldrax, and I think that style is more of the middling player type style. And I don't think you're a bad player if you take it. I just think if you don't take a Helmall and you don't take like MSU single model type shit, I don't know. I think there's only so much you can do, right? It's like a 3 block army. There's a lot of armies that have that. There's a lot of armies in this fucking tournament that are just like, here's my 3 blocks. Let's see what I can do. And, you know, they're all solid, but they're just, it's whatever. There's only so much, it's only so difficult, right? You still have to be good, but you don't have, you take away your options for some really cool plays. And I think the other one is the more single model based MSU style. I think the Herald really helps that style. I think it makes it so nice and so dynamic on what you pick on him. And I really enjoyed playing him. So, you know, the Ocho's over. I'm very happy with how I did. Obviously, I did the pairings, and I definitely, I wouldn't say I protected myself. I don't, I honestly believe I gave myself a lot of matchups that are like yellow, and I'm like, I can win it. And it ended up working out for me in most of them. So I will attribute that to some nice risks and some nice plays and a solid list that I think can definitely work. Really got to just play with it a lot and get used to how it plays. It feels weird to deploy it a lot. It feels kind of odd because so many pieces can go different directions and stuff. But because so many of your pieces can fight, you can react. Like there's games where like my Feldrax just kind of sit there and zone. I'm like, I don't need to fight with them. Not everything has to fight. If you're winning on one side heavily, sometimes you just need to zone with your others or cause a distraction to slow people down. So, you know, not everything has to go in at the same time. You know, if you're heavily outmatched on one side and you have the ability to kind of sit there and back up and flee and all this stuff, then use that ability to slow the enemy down while you win on the other side. So I think you have to kind of do that style with this because there's no one unit that just beats everything. It's not like I have one unit with 3 characters in it that walks forward and that's the only thing, and I'm either going to kill the enemy or they're going to redirect me for 6 turns. It's like because you don't have that, you can put your tools in position to do different things, and maybe it gets through, and maybe you bust open the game. But yeah, hopefully that helps. It's just under an hour for this video. Feel free to ask me questions if you have any. I'll keep making Warriors videos as tournaments keep going. All right, thanks.